দর্শক আমন্ত্রণ জানাচ্ছি চ্যানেল 24 এর মুখোমুখিতে। আজকের মুখোমুখি কিছুটা বিশেষ, কারণ আমাদের সাথে আছে বাংলাদেশ থেকে বিদায়ী জাতিসংঘের আবাসিক প্রতিনিধি এবং সমন্বয়কারী মিয়া সেপ্পো। মিয়া, ওয়েলকাম টু দ্য শো।
Thank you.
You're living, right?
I am, after 4 years in Bangladesh.
Fantastic. So how was your experience and what would be your take?
So it's been a really fantastic experience. I think, 4 years in Bangladesh. During these 4 years, there's obviously been a lot of attention to the Rohingya refugee crisis, and then we had the global pandemic. I think Bangladesh is a really interesting place to work because you deal with all the top-line global issues. I have worked on least developed countries my whole life, and Bangladesh, which will graduate from that category of countries, is a really interesting country in terms of what has been achieved, in terms of the journey ahead, in terms of some of the last mile challenges. And I think one thing that really stays with me is it's a small country with a big population.
Of course.
But within this small country, there is so much. I mean, there's a lot of different parts of the country, lots of culture, lots of different type of nature, from the CHT to the Sundarban to the north.
Right.
So it's a small place, but it's a big place in many ways.
So, and it was always not easy. It was challenges. Once you have to face the Rohingyas. When you arrive, they were nearly new in Bangladesh. You have to coordinate a lot of things along with the government. How challenging it was and how challenging it will be, the Rohingya crisis in coming days?
Right. I mean, I think it's important to keep in mind that we now speak about a protracted crisis. I remember early on during these discussions, government would remind us that this has been a protracted crisis for Bangladesh already for a much, much longer time.
Right.
It's just that massive exodus in August 2017 obviously brought this crisis to the attention of the whole world. And the gravity of the human rights violations in Myanmar was something that had not been seen before. So I think what is important is to collectively make sure that the Rohingya crisis is not forgotten. There's so many competing crises and priorities in our fractured world. So there's the importance of kind of keeping everybody engaged with finding solutions. And as we work towards solutions, helping Bangladesh manage the situation while the Rohingya still stay here.
There is a strong criticism that UN only talk a lot of things and a lot of good things in Bangladesh. They failed in Myanmar. How do you defend that?
I think it's important to recognize that when it comes to Myanmar, the UN has probably used every conceivable mechanism in terms of tackling the situation. The General Assembly is involved. There is a special envoy. There's been resolution from the General Assembly, including calling on member states to stop selling arms to Myanmar, including naming and shaming of businesses investing. You have the Human Rights Council involved, also having come up with a number of resolutions, a special envoy monitoring the situation in Myanmar. You have the independent investigative mechanism continuously documenting what happened, and you have both the ICC and the ICJ processes. And then you have the Security Council, where obviously there has been challenges finding unity, but where the recent resolution on just how worrisome the situation was quite clear, and where there's also a direct reference to the Rohingya that are hosted by Bangladesh temporarily on humanitarian grounds. So I think one thing to recognize is that Bangladesh, being a very active member state of the United Nations, has very actively used all these various mechanisms. The Secretary General himself continues to be very engaged in this crisis. Unfortunately, none of this has really had much impact on Myanmar, either in terms of repatriation or now in terms of return to democracy. Still, all those efforts have to continue. And I think, you've seen crisis situations around the world where it looks as if there's no solution. but eventually a solution will appear.
You were talking about the Rohingya crisis and what can be done and the future challenges. Let's talk about some more challenges. The climate change. We just finished the COP. How do you see that? Do you think there is a bit of change in the behaviors? Because we have seen China and USA, they're trying to have some dialogue on climate change. That's a good motive to face the challenges in coming days. But for Bangladesh, it remains the same until and unless they pay the promised $100 billion, right?
Right. I mean, I think we come out of COP26 very much with, on the one hand, on the other hand, right? So there's some good things in terms of reversing deforestation, in terms of new alliances, in terms of some of the commitments made. At the same time, it's actually not enough for implementation of the Paris Accord. It's not enough to cap temperature rise, and it did not deliver on the promises of loss and damage. So it's kind of the building blocks for continued effort. I think it's important to recognize that it still was one of those global moments, you know, just the attention to it, the mobilization globally, the energy coming from especially the youth climate activists.
Right.
And then I think the latest science as well, which means it's hard to credibly be a climate skeptic.
Right.
I tell people outside of Bangladesh that if you spend time in Bangladesh or you visit Bangladesh, you cannot be a climate skeptic because it's so concrete in the daily lives of so many people, not just the coastal region but also in the north and CHT. So I think for Bangladesh, I think it's a clear sign of the importance of Bangladesh in terms of global climate advocacy. Bangladesh forceful voice as the chair of the Climate Vulnerable Forum, Bangladesh expertise when it comes to the discussion on loss and damage, and also some of the very good examples from Bangladesh when it comes to climate adaptation. I hope when you take, you know, a global pandemic and COP26 together, that it will really, you know, move the world towards a low carbon footprint. And very much strengthen the commitment for cleaner, greener recovery.
Right. And what about the climate court we talked about? We had a lot of discussion, but it really didn't work out. How this can be effective one, so that when someone is like penalized for what misdeed they have done, they have a realization and someone else will learn, right?
Right. That's probably the way of the future. I think it's just a discussion that hasn't matured yet.
Yeah.
You know, it's about a relationship between countries,
Right.
because, you know, climate crisis doesn't recognize borders. It's a question of relationship between governments and multilaterals. And it's a question of legislation, which is not in place yet to really be able to do litigation of, you know, climate damage. So I think it probably will be a discussion that will move forward with, you know, different speed in different countries and with different emphasis as well in different countries. I think what is important to note is that the Human Rights Council, and Bangladesh is a member, has recognized, you know, a safe, clean environment as a right. Bangladesh has taken the initiative of a special rapporteur on climate and rights. So that obviously is expanding the repertoire and the eyes looking at issues. And I think that is going to be important both from the perspective of climate justice and also from the perspective of climate security.
Mia, in this last part, first question I'm going to ask you is, what is the biggest challenge graduating Bangladesh in coming days?
Right. I mean, maybe every now and then you need to do the question differently, and you should say, what is the biggest opportunity? So far, all your questions have been, what is the biggest challenge? Now, I think it's important to recognize just how remarkable that achievement is, and recognize that Bangladesh is very different from the other 46 LDCs, and also very different from the other LDCs that have graduated. This is a country that has a very big population. You know, Dhaka is probably the total number of the populations put together of the countries that have graduated so far. What are the challenges? I think the challenges ahead is going to be how Bangladesh renegotiate trade deals to compensate for those international special measures, to build the capacity to negotiate trade deals which is not based on these incentives but is based on competitiveness. And obviously when it comes to that competitiveness, it also links to ILO conventions, environmental protection, human rights standards. So it's kind of understanding that these issues actually really matter for negotiating those trade deals. And then it is about looking at how will the financing landscape change. I mean, ODA obviously had a shrinking role in Bangladesh already before, given how the economy is growing. So then you're looking at domestic resource mobilization, you're looking at really engaging private sector and the innovative capacity of the private sector.
And to make all this happening, you need to have some political will and good political practices. On this point, do you think the political parties coming ahead of the national election are in a good shape? Are they having a sort of level at the same level? Because there is a lot of complaint and a lot of question and a lot of doubts.
Right. I mean, I think having good elections that are seen internationally as meeting standards, it should really become everybody's win-win. So it's important for all who participate in the elections, and I think there is time to make sure that there's trust in the election commission, that there's trust in the administration of elections, and that is obviously something that the election commission has the capacity to do. And then that there is an electoral environment that allows for campaigning, that keeps levels of electoral violence down. And I hope also a campaigning period that really allows for focusing on the issues. So looking ahead, where is Bangladesh going? How do you make sure that young people trust, the democracy of Bangladesh and engage, not as, a loud crowd, but rather engage in talking about the issues. And of course, the media has a very important role to play in promoting a conversation about the issues and in making sure that that involves everybody in society and young people.
And do you think media have the capacity in Bangladesh to talk about it openly and say spade is a spade?
Well, shouldn't you ask? That's a question for you, not for me, right?
How do you see as a reader?
I mean, I think there's obviously a very broad range of media in Bangladesh, so both print media, TV, radio, and then the online media. And I think it's a bit of a mixed, probably mixed capacities across the range of media outlets. I think there needs to be, the media needs to be professional. That's how the media earns the trust, to keep that space of ensuring that there is dialogue. And in order to have that, the media obviously needs to report in an unbiased professional manner when it comes to elections, making sure that it's not feeding narratives that might actually be inciting. And mind you, when it comes to some of the violence, including violence against women, making sure that coverage is professional and very mindful of the rights and the concerns around the survivors.
Thank you so much. And once again, thank you so much for coming to studio when you're leaving Bangladesh and for your new venture. All the very best.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
দর্শক, আমরা কথা বলছিলাম জাতিসংঘের বিদায়ী আবাসিক প্রতিনিধি মিয়া সেপ্পোর সাথে। বাংলাদেশের সবাই সমান অধিকার চর্চা করবে, সে রাজনীতিবিদ হোক, গণমাধ্যম কর্মী হোক, নারী পুরুষের অধিকার সমান হবে, একটা সুন্দর আগামীর বাংলাদেশ তিনি দেখতে চান। সে কথাই আজকে শো শেষ করছি। দেখা হবে মুখোমুখির অন্য কোনো পর্বে।